So ever since Metroid Prime 4 was announced, I've been trying to play catch up on that series, kind of because I consider myself pretty knowledgeable about most Nintendo series. But Metroid, for a while there was kind of a blind spot for me. I was always really interested. I remember that 2010 Metroid Other M trailer looked really good. That CG looked really good, and obviously now, not everybody's favorite Metroid game. But I was always interested in trying out all the games. Always looked really good. But I was always daunted because there's always a lot of collecting, and I'm a huge completionist, so I'd always feel a compulsion to get 100%. But I've kind of worked through my fears, and so now I'm going through the games. At this point, I finished Prime 1, I finished Zero Mission. I'm about halfway through Metroid Fusion. I'm also about halfway through Metroid Prime 2, but I was playing on the trilogy, and my Wii crapped out on me. So, unrelated note, Nintendo, if you could bring the trilogy to the Switch, that would be great. I would really appreciate that. But yeah, I've been going through that series, and I've also kind of been interested in checking out a lot of other games in that genre, in the Metroidvania style, like Castlevania, the other half of the name of the genre. I really want to check those games out. I'm very interested in Bloodstained, which is kind of the spiritual successor, but I've also been playing a lot of Hollow Knight, which is very good. I waited for it for about a year and a half for the Switch version. And it's very good. I'm almost done. I'm just doing a lot of the side stuff, of course, trying to 100% it. But in my research of all these games, I've kind of come across a recurring complaint that people have about the progression of these games, in that you always start off with a mission, and then an event happens where you lose the Varia suit, you lose missiles, you lose the Morph Ball and bombs and the Ice Beam and things like that. And this isn't a dig at Metroid. All of those scenarios are contextual, and they always have a lot of weapons, a large variety of weapons that they add throughout the series. But it's definitely made me think a lot about progression in games, both good cases and bad cases in video games. Basically just the way that video games power you up as you play through the entire experience. And so one example that came to mind immediately, because I just finished it, was God of War. And let me tell you, God of War does progression great. We'll get into a little bit. Slight combat, gameplay spoilers if you're super media blackout on God of War. When you first start up the game, you already have the Leviathan X, and you're already pretty powerful because you're already a god at this point. But your range of abilities is kind of limited. You can throw the axe and all that, which let me tell you, feels really good. But you can really only do a standard attack and a heavy attack at the beginning of the game. But then throughout the experience, you're unlocking all these new moves and all these abilities that are really, really cool. And even when the enemies get tougher, you still feel like you're getting better, you're becoming more powerful so that you can properly combat these enemies throughout the game. And I think a good sign of good gameplay progression in games is kind of the same as standard character progression, whether it be in a movie or a game or a book or something like that. Where a character starts at point A, and then by the time they get to point B, at the end of the story, they have clearly changed. In the case of games, you have clearly become more powerful to overcome whatever obstacle that you need to get through. And so I think God of War does it really well, because you already are a god at the beginning of the game, but then as you progress through the game, you are getting more abilities, and Kratos is more and more able to just mess shit up throughout the entire experience. And the God of War is a game that really does the whole progression model well. On the other end of the spectrum, I was trying to think of games that maybe don't necessarily have good gameplay progression. And it was tough to think about because I tried to play good games. But then I realized as I thought about it more that maybe not having great gameplay progression doesn't mean that you're not a great game. It just means that you're focusing on other things. And so that's how I came to find that Breath of the Wild maybe doesn't have great gameplay progression. And I know that that might anger some people. And trust me, I love Breath of the Wild. I love the Zelda franchise in general. It was personally my game of the year last year, and that game did a lot of new things for the franchise and also just for gaming in general. It did a lot of new things. That being said, in Breath of the Wild, Link doesn't necessarily move from point A to point B so much as he just wanders through one big point A. Spoilers incoming again for Breath of the Wild this time, and this time we're going to be seeing the final boss. And so if you don't want to see that, I would get out of here. The thing about Breath of the Wild is that you get all of your abilities up front at the beginning of the game, and that's it. I think they all get like one upgrade, but it just allows you to do that ability one more time or whatever. You can freeze an item in place and it stays there for longer. But other than that, you don't really get any other abilities. There are no skill trees, there's nothing to progress. And that isn't inherently wrong or bad or anything. It actually allows for a lot of cool, unique game design choices, especially since Breath of the Wild is so open. You can use those abilities to just mess around however you want. You can solve puzzles in more than one way, and it becomes one of those experiences where everybody plays the game differently, which is really cool. And that whole destructible weapon system was kind of a hot topic, is kind of a hot topic about the game. And I was personally fine with it, I was okay with it, I liked it while I was playing the game. But looking back on it now, it helps show how Link doesn't necessarily get more powerful throughout the game. He's just finding more things to help him throughout the way. It's like I might try to chop an onion with a butter knife, and that's not working out. But then I find a paring knife and I can chop the onion in half the time. But that doesn't necessarily make me a better cook. I'm still eating raw onions for breakfast. And you can even see this in the final boss for Breath of the Wild. The entire game, they're hyping up the fact that beating each dungeon will give you more power to fight Ganon. But then by the time you get there, it turns out that just means they'll do half the work for you. It just puts them at half health. And it is really cool that you're able to fight Ganon as soon as you start the game. I love the openness of Breath of the Wild and the direction that they took with it. But I can't help but miss how games like Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess made you feel like you grew throughout the game, like Link gets more powerful. He has more knowledge about how to, go through the world. Like it took work to get to point B, like you actually progressed. On the other side of the coin, I want to take a look at a game that I think has one of the best progression systems in video games. And that game, of course, is, say it with me now, Kingdom Hearts 2. And so we'll take a look about how that game just makes you feel powerful. And of course, I'm sorry, again, spoilers for Kingdom Hearts 2. But this game's been out for 13 years, so I feel like this time this one's on you. Starting right from the beginning, as you play as Roxas and Sora, it's clear that you're kind of just starting out on this adventure. Sora even has the context of being asleep for a year, so he doesn't remember most of his abilities. And as you're fighting enemies, all you can really do is just whack away until they die. Sometimes you get these cool reaction commands that make you look like you know what you're doing, like when Roxas fights Twilight Thorn here. But in the end, he also just flops onto the ground, almost like he did it by accident. And I love that. Not only is it showing your lack of progression through the limited amount of stuff that you can do, but it's also just the animation of the attack, of you just falling to the ground, showing that you're still not great at this. It serves both the idea of gameplay progression, so that you personally feel way cooler later on, but also the idea that Roxas doesn't quite remember how to use the Keyblade, how to fight. It serves his character, and it's also that rare form of game design where gameplay serves the story, and I think that is really cool. Fast forward 30 to 40 hours depending on who you are, and Sora is way more beefed up. You've gone from a kid who gets tired after 2 waves of enemies, to a heartless nobody-killing beast who is hell-bent on destruction by any means necessary. You have all these abilities that make normal combos look like you should be in God of War, my personal favorite being Explosion that just wipes out all of the enemies around you. And then if that wasn't enough, the Drive forms in Kingdom Hearts 2 take you to a whole new level. Valor form lets you get up close and personal, Wisdom form makes your magic basically a one-hit kill, Master form is kind of a mix of both of those, and then Final form is probably the coolest I have ever felt in a video game. I'll just let this one play on for a little bit.
It's over! Take this!
And even in the reaction commands, you look like a badass, like these ones during the final boss sequence. By the end of the game, you feel like you've grown and you've become more powerful. And if a good sign of game progression is going from point A to point B, Kingdom Hearts 2 makes you feel like you've made it to point Z. Even if you're fighting the super hard optional bosses, they might kick your ass, but it doesn't diminish how far you've come, it just means that they match your already super high level. And I think that is way cool. And obviously, not having that progression doesn't make it a bad game. Obviously, Breath of the Wild is real good, but when that good gameplay progression is there, and it's done right, it's a good feeling. And I can only hope that Kingdom Hearts 3 matches the levels that Kingdom Hearts 2 were at. 6 more months. And that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Do you have any games that you think should be mentioned if they have good or bad progression? Do you have any topics for me to cover in the coming weeks? Do you hate me for talking about Breath of the Wild so negatively? I know I do. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you come here next week. Hopefully I'll be back here having another topic editorial to talk to you about. And in the meantime, we'll have more podcasts and Let's Plays. But until then, thanks for watching.